Okay, so today's lesson we're going to talk about goods and services tax, the GST. So GST starts from the 1st of July 2000. It was introduced by the Australian government when John Howard was Prime Minister. It is a tax on the supply of goods and services in Australia and also on the goods that are imported into Australia. So you and me, we are all individuals are consumers, and we're therefore paying tax on most of the things we buy or use. The introduction of a GST was a major change in Australia's tax structure, and it is 10% of the original cost of goods or services we use. So the GST is essentially a value-added tax. So this means that tax is paid at each step along the chain of transaction from the maker to the end user, who bears the cost of the tax. So it is therefore called a consumption tax. So GST, 10% of the value of goods and service, and it is included in the price. And this is very important. In Australia, the price that you pay for majority of the items and the services that you use for majority of the things, the GST is already included in the price. So if you pay $10 for a Happy Meal, then that $10 within that $10, a certain amount of money is GST that's paid to the Australian government. Okay, all right. So GST is included in the price. Alright, so if you buy a bicycle from a GST registered retailers for $1,100, right? Think about this. If you purchase a bike, okay, that costs $1,100. Then after you do the calculation, which I will show you later, that $100 will be the GST. So 100 of this amount is the GST, which does not pay to the registered retailers. So it actually goes to the government. So basically, the retailers, when they charge you $1,100, that additional $100, they are going to pay to the Australian government, all right, and forward it to the tax office, which is called ATO. All right. Now, some goods and services are exempt from the GST, so you don't have to pay GST. So there are some GST-free items. So I think the everyday essential basic food items are GST-free. All right, so like a basic food, that example of that will be like milk, bread, and fresh fruit and veggies. Those are GST, free items. You don't have to pay anything, pay any GST for that. Another thing that's GST free is the most education. Not the stationery or books you purchase, but the education fees. Okay, the fees that you pay is most of the education is GST free. Childcare is also GST free, so you don't have to pay GST for that services. And certain health and goods services, that's GST free. Obviously, if you want to find more GST free items, you can go to the ATO website. All right, now, how do we calculate GST? And so the calculation of GST is pretty easy. It's just 10%, but the people get mixed up with the question is, in Australia, the price on the price tag includes GST already, okay? So you can't just simply times this number, like previous example, the bike costs you $1,100. If the question asks you how much is the GST, you can't just simply times this number by 10%. The reason for that is $1,100 is already included GST. All right, so that's why you can't times by 100. What I want to show you is a flowchart, and that flowchart would be really helpful to understand how to do the calculation for GST. All right, so there's three important concepts that you need to know. The first one is called the pre-GST price, which is the price set by the retailers, the price set by the iPhone company, Apple company, for example, the price set by a certain service that you have to use. But this is not the price or the final price that you pay. This is just a pre-GST price. I'll usually just call that's the original price, okay? And then there will be something called the GST charged. So how much they charge you as tax, so GST charged. All right? Oops. And the last one is the GST inclusive price, which is the price that we pay as a consumer. So that's the final price that you see from a price tag. All right, so what are the relationships with those, these terms here? How do we do the calculation? All right, so what we need to do here is from the pre-GST price, if you want to work out how much is the GST, that's really easy. This is what you do. You times by 10%. That's really easy. You times by 10%. From the pre-GST price, you times by 10%, you can work out how much is the GST. All right, so how much the GST. All right, now how do we find the GST inclusive price? Okay, how do we find the GST inclusive price? In order for you to find the GST inclusive price, you've got two ways to do it. If you already know the GST, then you can just plus the pre-GST price, and then you will get the GST inclusive price. Okay, so that's pretty easy to do because when you calculate the GST, all right, that's for example, $1,000 is the cost of the original cost of the bike, and if you times by 10%, you get $100. So you plus the 100 by 1,000, that give you the GST inclusive price. But there is some sort of like shortcut and easy way to calculate. If I know how much GST is charged, how can I calculate the GST inclusive price? If you want to go from GST charged to GST inclusive price, all you need to do is times by 11. All right, times by 11. And then if you want to go from the GST inclusive price to the pre-GST price, like going that direction here, what we need to do here is we're going to divide this number by 110% or divide it by 1.1. All right, the reason for that is the GST inclusive price is sort of like 110% of the pre-GST price, because that extra 10% is, is the GST they charge you. All right, so that's a sort of like a flow chart. Now, if you want to go backwards, right, if you want to go the other way around, all you have to do is instead of multiplication, this time is division here. And then instead of division, it's multiplication, okay? So times by 110% or times by 1.1. And here, instead of divided by 11, times by 11, we divide by 11. Now, obviously, this looks a bit confusing, just because of, as you can see here, we've got, in order for you to do the calculations, you sort of like need to memorize all of these. But once you start to do the question, all right, you'll find it's pretty easy to understand here. Now, make sure you either memorize this or you know what to do with the calculation. All right, so I'd like to show you a few examples. All right, so the first example here is to find the pre-GST price. So the price before the tax, all right, of the following items. All right, so the first item is, let's just say, Apple iPad Pro, okay? And the price that you have to pay, I'm just making this up, all right? $1,499, roughly this price here. That's the base model. Let me know if I made a mistake with this, but that's okay. So that's the so that's the final price, right? So this is the price we pay, and we call that GST inclusive price. If you want to find out what is the pre-GST price, okay, how do we do it? Now, if we go back to the charts, the pre-GST price, the pre-GST price and the GST inclusive price, all we need to do is remember GST is 10%, and that 1,499 is 110% of the original cost. So now what we need to do is simply we use 1,499 and we divide this number by 110%, or you can divide it by 1.1 because they are the same. All right, so let's do the calculation. 1,499 divided by 1.1, and you get $1,362.73 to 2 decimal places. Remember financial mathematics, if it's money related questions, your final answers must be in 2 decimal places to the nearest cent. Okay, so this is the pre-GST price. So that's the 10%. After you remove that 10% from the original, from the final price, you get the original price that's set by the Apple. All right. So that's how you do the calculation. Pretty easy. All right. Well, so that means if you go overseas and you can get tax refunds if you're going overseas and purchase an iPad and you as a gift for anyone that your friends, your family members, from overseas, then you can actually claim that 10% back because you are basically not using the item in Australia, so you don't have to pay the goods and the services tax, which is the GST. All right. The next one, let's just do another one. A pizza dinner for $34.99. How much GST you have to pay for that? Okay, so remember this is again the GST inclusive price. All right, so the calculation would be $34.99 divided by 110%, or you divide it by 1.1, and you do the calculation divided by 1.1. So that is $31.81. Okay, so for a pizza dinner that costs you $34.99, then you only, I guess around about $3 is the tax that you have to pay to the government. All right, and the rest of them you pay to the shop. All right, so this is to 2 decimal places, and that's the pre-GST price. Okay, so that's the first example. All right, that's the first example. All right, so the next example I'd like to show you is how do we find the actual GST. So find the GST charged. And the first one would be a TV that cost $2,350. All right, $2,350. Okay, so that's the cost of the TV. Now I want to work out what is the GST charged. All right, so there are 2 different ways you can do it. The first method 1, you can divide this number by 110% to calculate what is the pre-GST price. So 2,350 divided by 1.1, that becomes $2,136.36. Once we calculate that, we find out what's the GST by using the final price, subtract the original price before the GST, and you should be able to work out how much is the tax, right? All right, so the tax will be $213.64. All right, so that's the GST charge. That's the first method, which takes to do 2 steps. The second method that you can do is you simply use the final price or the GST inclusive price and you divide this number by 11. Okay, divide by 11. That's a shortcut, and you are going to get the same answer as well. All right, so you're going to get this number, exactly the same number. All right, so make sure you do use your calculator to see if you get the same answer or not. All right, and then again, this represents the easier calculation. So if you don't want to use this method, then you can use the method 1, calculate the pre-GST price and then find the difference between the pre-GST price and the final price. All right, so I think that's pretty easy, and as long as you follow the flow chart, you should be able to work out the answer quite easily. Okay, hopefully you're enjoying the lesson. Thank you, everyone.